Sound of laughter, clinking glasses, jazz echoing through the night. I followed the music and found hell. My wife paralyzed, starving, crawling on the floor for water, while my son, the boy I raised to be a man, was outside laughing with his friends, drunk on champagne. The call wire was cut. The door locked from the outside. The woman I'd loved for 40 years left to die 10 feet from her own family. That was the night something inside me broke. Not from grief, from fury. I'm Bruce Lawrence. And if you're hearing my story, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own blood became the monster? Because that night, I didn't just come home early. I came home to war. I heard the laughter before I even reached the driveway. Not the kind of laughter you hear from joy, but the kind that grates loud, careless, detached from everything decent. It was my son's laugh, Ethan's. And that was the moment I knew something was wrong. The house was glowing like a resort at midnight. Jazz music spilled from the patio speakers, glasses clinking against each other, people talking too loud for a Friday night, in a quiet Scottsdale neighborhood. I hadn't told anyone I was coming home. My flight to Chicago had been canceled 2 hours earlier because of a storm over O'Hare. I was supposed to be sitting in a hotel bar near the airport by now, reviewing contracts worth $2 million. Instead, I was standing in the dark, 5 hours of highway dust on my windshield, staring at my own house and feeling like a stranger in it. The whole way back, a thought had been eating at me. Around noon, Marion's nurse Linda had called to say she was quitting. Not because of Marion's condition, but because, as she put it, your son told me my services were no longer needed. Ethan said he'd arranged alternative care. That was the first crack. I'd told him a dozen times Marion's care was non-negotiable. After her accident 9 years ago, I made sure she had professional help around the clock. Paralysis doesn't just take movement. It steals privacy, dignity, and time. I promised myself I'd give her back all three in any way I could. But now the nurse was gone, and Ethan hadn't called. The front gate was open. That was another red flag. Marion was obsessive about keeping it locked. It made her feel safe when I was away. I parked on the street, engine off, letting the sound of the night settle. From inside came a burst of laughter, Chloe's voice this time followed by Ethan's again, mocking high on something. The faint smell of cigar smoke drifted through the desert air. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I walked quietly around the side path, toward the living room windows. Through the glass I could see them. Ethan, my 36-year-old son. Expensive shirt unbuttoned, halfway barefoot. A glass of wine in hand, and Chloe sprawled across our leather couch, laughing at something on his phone. There were 2 other people I didn't recognize, maybe friends or colleagues, half drunk and oblivious. And in that same house, somewhere behind the hallway door, my wife, the woman who'd once played piano for half the city's fundraisers, was supposed to be asleep, medicated, safe. Except the light in her room was on. Something in me snapped to full alert. I slipped through the side entrance. My old security code still worked. The air inside was heavy, stale, not the usual scent of lavender oil and disinfectant. The air conditioner was off, the temperature climbing close to 85. I noticed it right away, because Marion's condition made her sensitive to heat. I called her name once, softly. No answer. The hallway toward her care room was darker than usual. The security camera above the door dead. Its red light was out. I flipped the switch for the overhead lamp. Nothing. The breaker hadn't tripped. Someone had cut power to that circuit. I tried the doorknob to her room. Locked. A new lock, brass and shiny. My heart stopped for a second. We never locked that door. Never. Outside, the jazz track changed to something upbeat. Laughter again. The kind of sound you can't unhear once you know cruelty is happening behind it. Marion. I whispered through the door. I thought I heard movement, a small scrape, maybe the wheel of her chair against tile. Then a weak voice, dry, barely audible. "Bruce, is that you?" That single line felt like a knife. I pulled harder on the door. The cheap lock broke on the third try. The room smelled of sweat metal and something burnt like a space left too long without air. Marion was by the window in her wheelchair, head leaning against the frame. The bedside water jug was empty. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. Her emergency call button, the red one by her hand, dangled uselessly. The wire had been cut clean. I dropped to my knees beside her. "Jesus, Marion, what happened?" She blinked slowly, eyes glassy from dehydration. "He said the nurse wasn't coming anymore. Said he'd take care of me himself." "How long since?" "Yesterday morning. He locked the door. Said it was for my safety." I looked at the digital clock by her bed. 11:37 p.m. She'd been in that heat for nearly 2 days. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't even think. The man who built hospitals, who donated millions to health charities, who prided himself on control, had lost it all inside his own house. Then I saw it on the bedside table, half covered by a blanket. A stack of papers neatly clipped, a life insurance policy. My name forged in blue ink. The policy beneficiary, Ethan K. Lawrence. Value $3 million. I didn't feel rage right away. I felt cold, like someone had drained the blood out of me. Marion's fingers brushed my wrist. "Don't let him know you're here," she whispered. "He told them you were flying till Monday." I nodded, kissed her forehead, then adjusted her wheelchair toward the small fan near the window. I filled her glass with bottled water from my bucket. She drank, trembling. "Stay quiet," I said. "You're safe now." Outside, a bottle shattered laughter again, closer to the kitchen window. I peeked through the blinds. Ethan was pouring champagne for Chloe and their friends, telling a story I couldn't hear over the music. He looked relaxed, radiant, even like a man who'd just sealed the deal of his life. I could see my reflection in the window glass, and behind it, him. My face worn, lined gray against his, young and shining. We were two versions of the same man, separated by choices. I wanted to storm out there, grab him by the throat, demand why. But I didn't. I'd learned in business that emotion kills precision. And whatever this was, this betrayal, this madness, it needed precision. I turned back to Marion. She was already asleep, her breathing steadier. I lowered the blinds and stood for a moment in the dim light, feeling the weight of every promise I'd ever made her. Then I looked once more toward the patio, where my son raised his glass, under the string lights. The same hands that once built sandcastles with me now held the wine that celebrated his mother's suffering. I whispered to the empty room that night. I realized my son wasn't just lost. He'd crossed a line no man should ever cross. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me, the father, the builder, the husband, began to crumble, making space for something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous purpose. People like to call me self-made. I used to wear that word like a medal. It meant I'd earned every square foot of what I owned, every inch of glass and steel that carried the Stonebridge Developments logo. But standing in that silent room beside Marion's wheelchair, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, I realized something brutal. I hadn't built a legacy. I'd built a house of mirrors. I was born in a trailer park outside Yuma, Arizona, the only son of a war mechanic and a woman who cleaned other people's kitchens. My father used to say, "If you don't own the ground under your feet, you don't really exist." I took that literally. At 21, I bought a half-acre of desert outside Tucson, poured the foundation myself, and sold the finished building a year later for twice what I'd spent. That was 1986, the beginning of everything. 3 decades later, Stonebridge was a name people whispered in boardrooms. 23 developments across Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado. 2,000 employees. Net worth north of 100 million. Forbes called me the builder of the Southwest. I liked that title. It sounded like permanence. Then life reminded me, nothing permanent stays that way. 9 years ago, Marion and I were driving home from Sedona after a charity gala when a delivery truck ran a red light. She took the impact on her side. Doctors said she was lucky to survive, though she never walked again. The months after the accident nearly broke me. I learned how to feed her, bathe her, lift her into bed. I'd be up at 5 shaving and dressing her before heading to the office by 7. I hired nurses, therapists, a nutritionist, but I insisted on doing the mornings myself. It wasn't obligation, it was love, discipline, and a promise that she would never feel less human because of her body. Our friends in Phoenix used to say we were the couple everyone wanted to be, him, the empire builder, her, the saint who survived tragedy with grace. Maybe that's why Ethan's downfall feels like more than betrayal. It feels like vandalism of everything we stood for. Ethan was our miracle baby. Born when Marion was 39 after years of failed treatments. He grew up breathing the air of boardrooms, listening to phone calls that decided millions. I taught him the math of profit and loss before I taught him to drive. He watched me negotiate deals at our kitchen table while Marion cooked Sunday dinners. When I looked at him, I saw the future smarter, bolder, smoother than I ever was. He graduated from Yale, came back with a degree in business and a chip on his shoulder. He said the old ways were dead, that real estate was slow money. He wanted speed. He wanted risk. Cryptocurrency venture pools, Helix Capital, a private advisory group out of Los Angeles that promised exponential returns. I used to smile at his ambition. I told myself it was youth, that the fire would cool and he'd find balance. When he asked to take over as CEO at 34, I agreed. I kept 40% of the company and stepped back into the role of chairman, thinking it was time for the next generation. But within a year, the culture changed. The offices I'd built to feel solid and respectful turned glossy and loud. Ethan's new partners wore sneakers with suits and talked about liquidity events and strategic pivots. Our oldest employees started leaving. He said it was evolution. I told him it felt like infection. We argued, of course. Fathers and sons always do, especially when pride is the real language between them. But I never imagined malice. Never. Ethan was my blood. Then small things began to pile up, the kind you dismiss until they form a pattern. Marion told me she'd seen new accounts opened in the company's name. Auditors reported inconsistencies that didn't affect the bottom line. I caught Ethan lying once about a loan he'd personally guaranteed. He called it creative structuring. Still, I let it go. I told myself I was being old-fashioned, too rigid. I didn't want to become the bitter father who couldn't let go of control. When Marion's nurse mentioned that Ethan had ordered her dismissal, I felt that same instinct, that faint warning deep in the gut, but I silenced it. I even called Ethan that morning. He didn't pick up. Sent a text, "All good, Dad. I've got Mom covered. Focus on Chicago." And I did, until fate decided to cancel my flight and hand me the truth. Driving home that night, I kept thinking about all the times I'd told Ethan, a man's worth is measured by how he treats the people who can't fight back. I'd said it after we donated wheelchairs to the rehab center, where Marion had first learned to move her fingers again. He was 16 then. He'd nodded politely, but his eyes had already drifted to his phone. Now at 36, he'd proven how little that lesson meant. As I sat beside Marion's bed, replaying the years like a film on fast forward, every image bled into the next, her laughter before the crash, Ethan's first apartment in New Haven, the ribbon cutting at our first high-rise, each one a piece of the structure I'd built. And all of it, every beam and window now, felt contaminated by what he'd done. There's a kind of pain that doesn't roar, it hums. It stays low in your chest, vibrating quietly, while the world pretends to keep turning. That was me humming with anger and disbelief. I walked through the house that night, after she fell asleep, touching the walls I'd designed myself, the oak trim, the marble counters, the paintings Marion had chosen. I thought about how everything I'd created to protect my family had somehow become the stage for our destruction. In business, when a building starts to crack, you don't patch it. You study the foundation. You find where the stress began. Standing in that hallway, I knew exactly where ours did in my pride. I'd built everything except humility. And now my son was dismantling it brick by brick, one signature at a time. When the first rays of dawn slid through the blinds, I made myself a cup of black coffee in the silent kitchen. The same counter where Ethan had once done his algebra homework was now scattered with empty wine bottles from his party. A champagne cork rolled under my foot. On the fridge, pinned with a magnet, was a schedule written in Chloe's handwriting. Monday, doctor assessment. Tuesday, file guardianship. My pulse slowed. Guardianship. That's when I understood the scale of it. This wasn't a careless act of neglect. It was a plan. I looked at the empty hallway that led to Marion's room and whispered, "You picked the wrong man to bury alive, son." Because if there's one thing I know better than concrete and steel, it's how to rebuild and how to bring down a structure that's rotting from the inside. When I designed this house 20 years ago, I built it around Marion's future wide hallways for her wheelchair ramps hidden under stonework, a room on the east side that caught the softest light of the morning. I wanted her to feel the sun before the pain. That room was supposed to be a sanctuary, but that night it felt like a prison. The first thing I noticed was silence, the kind that doesn't belong in a home, that once echoed with piano notes and morning laughter. The air was still heavy, as if it knew something indecent had happened. The hum of the security system was gone. No beeps from the motion sensors, no blinking red light above the doorframe. I checked the main panel near the laundry room. Disconnected. Every camera feed in the east wing had been offline for 48 hours. Someone had done it cleanly, like a professional cut. I moved down the hallway toward Marion's care room. My footsteps sounded foreign against the tile. The doorknob was colder than it should have been, new brass, still slick, from factory polish. We never changed that lock. I leaned close, listening. Behind the door, the faint shuffle of a wheel. Then her voice, dry and small. "Bruce, is that you?" I swallowed the rising panic. "It's me," I whispered. "Don't move. I'm opening it." The door didn't give easily. Whoever installed the new lock hadn't bothered with subtlety. It was the kind you buy at a hardware store when you don't expect anyone to question why it's there. I forced it with a screwdriver from the hallway toolbox. The metal snapped, echoing through the house. The smell hit me. First sewer air, body heat, and antiseptic gone stale. Marion was by the window, her wheelchair angled awkwardly toward the corner, the emergency call cord cut and curled on the floor like a dead snake. Her water pitcher was bone dry. I filled a glass from the bottle I'd brought from the car. She drank greedily, trembling eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "He said it was for my safety," she whispered. "He said he needed to limit my movement while you were away. That the nurse made mistakes." I could hear the shame in her voice, because kindness makes people blame themselves for cruelty. I touched her face, gently, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. "You did nothing wrong, Marion. Nothing." Her lips twitched into something that wanted to be a smile, but couldn't find the strength. "I knew you'd come back." I looked around the room. The blinds were drawn. The temperature monitor on the wall was blinking red, 90 degrees. The AC vent had been shut. On the table beside her, a stack of papers set neatly under a pen. I pulled them into the light. A life insurance policy. $3 million. My name forged across the signature line in a handwriting close enough to fool a bank clerk. Ethan K. Lawrence listed as beneficiary. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I stared at the paper as if it might rewrite itself into something less obscene. My own name looked like a mockery. I'd signed hundreds of contracts in my life. Partnerships, development deals, acquisitions, but never one that made my stomach turn. This wasn't business. This was premeditation. Outside, the jazz playlist shifted. Miles Davis, So What? The same track Ethan used to play when he wanted to sound sophisticated in college. Through the blinds, I saw him lift a glass sunlight from the patio lamps flashing against the rim. Chloe leaned into him, laughing, while one of their friends lit a cigar. The smoke curled upward, graceful and cruel. He looked happy. My son looked happy. I turned back to the policy. On the last page, a date signed 3 weeks ago. Around the same time Marion's nurse was dismissed. Pieces started to align in my head with mechanical precision. Ethan shuts off cameras, changes locks, cuts cords, files for guardianship, buys an insurance policy on his paralyzed mother. The pattern wasn't negligence, it was engineering. He was building his own structure, the kind meant to bury, not shelter. I opened the drawer of Marion's bedside table and found more evidence of quiet suffering. A notebook. Her handwriting was shaky but familiar. No V3. Ethan says I forget things. Maybe I do. No V4. He says water makes me nauseous. I don't feel thirsty, but my throat hurts. No V5. He said he'd fix the AC, still hot. Each entry shorter than the one before it, as if exhaustion had stolen the space between words. I closed the book and set it down carefully, the way you'd lay a body to rest. For years I'd believed my discipline could protect us from chaos. Control had always been my armor: numbers, schedules, contracts. But in that moment, staring at the evidence of my son's betrayal, I realized control can't defend against the people who live inside your walls. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain an inch aside. Ethan raised his glass again, toasting something invisible. Chloe clapped. Their friends cheered. The patio lights reflected in the glass, doubling his image over mine. For a moment it looked like he was standing inside my reflection, drinking my life. I whispered, not loud enough for anyone but the house to hear, I built everything so my family could live safe. Now my own house is a cage. The words hung there, heavy, metallic. I turned back to Marion. Her eyelids fluttered. She was half asleep, body finally cooling under the gentle breeze from the fan. I'd reconnected. I touched her hair the way I used to when she played piano after dinner. Then I looked again at the lock, the forged signature, the cut cord. Evidence. Proof. Ethan thought he'd built the perfect crime inside the walls I designed. He forgot one thing about builders. We understand load-bearing structures, and we know exactly where to hit when something needs to collapse. I picked up the forged papers, folded them carefully, and slid them into my briefcase. Then I checked the clock, 12:42 a.m. By dawn, I would know exactly how deep his foundation of lies went. By sunrise, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows after a storm, but still smells of lightning. Marion slept through most of the morning, her pulse finally steady. I left a note by her bedside. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Then I went to the one place in the world that had always felt like control: my office. The Stonebridge headquarters sat 15 miles north of the house, a glass and concrete monument to ambition. I used to love the sound of my shoes echoing through the marble lobby before anyone else arrived. It made me feel like the building itself was waiting for orders. But that morning it felt different. hollow, watchful. The receptionist looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Lawrence, you weren't scheduled today." "I wasn't supposed to be home either," I said, walking past her before she could respond. I called Dylan the moment I reached my office. Dylan Carter had been with me for 22 years, my head of finance, my friend, and the only man I trusted to tell me when I was being an idiot. A Vietnam vet's son, meticulous as a surgeon. He showed up 15 minutes later with 2 cups of black coffee and a face that told me he already suspected something was wrong. "What's happened?" he asked. "Ethan's trying to bury his mother alive," I said flatly. "And he's using my name to do it." Dylan didn't blink. "Tell me everything." So I did: the locked door, the cut wires, the insurance policy, the forged signature. He listened without interruption, then set his coffee down, cracked his knuckles and said, "Give me 3 hours." By 10 a.m., my office door opened again. Dylan entered with a manila folder, thick enough to choke a horse. He closed the blinds before he spoke. "I started with the insurance," he said. "Your signature was digitally cloned. The document was submitted through Helix Capital's brokerage division under an LLC called Helix Holdings West. The owner of record," he paused, "Chloe Anderson Lawrence." My jaw tightened. "My daughter-in-law owns a holding company. She incorporated it 6 months ago. Registered agent out of LA. I ran the filings through the Secretary of State database. Guess who notarized the initial documents?" "Ethan," I said. Dylan nodded. "But that's not the part that scared me. You asked me to review Stonebridge's share distribution last quarter. Remember, you still hold 40% through the family trust, but Ethan controls the remaining 60. Last week, he transferred 30 of those percent to Helix Holdings West as collateral for a capital expansion loan." Except Dylan slid a paper across the desk. "There is no loan. The lender's address traces back to a PO30 box in Beverly Hills used by the same attorney who filed the guardianship petition." I stared at the page. The paper was warm from the printer, but it might as well have been ice. "What guardianship petition?" Dylan opened his laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a scanned document, stamped by Maricopa County Superior Court. "Emergency petition for temporary guardianship of Bruce and Marion Lawrence. Filed 3 days ago. The reason: declining cognitive capacity and evidence of financial mismanagement, endangering estate assets." My name, my wife's name, my company. All of it framed as incompetence. "He's claiming you're unfit to manage your own affairs," Dylan said. He attached fake medical records. I checked the metadata. They were created from template files Helix uses for elder asset transfers. I took off my glasses and pressed my hands against my eyes. Jesus Christ. There's more. Dylan opened another folder. Emails between Ethan and a consultant at Helix Capital. Subject line: asset transition plan. He read aloud: "Once guardianship clears, funds can move legally. Ensure liquidity before media involvement. Chloe handling PR, narrative recognitive decline." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the pieces rearranged themselves into something monstrous. Ethan wasn't just stealing from us. He was doing it by the book, with legal paperwork, notarized signatures, and digital trails that made it all look legitimate. He wasn't a thief. He was an architect of fraud, using the same precision I once admired in him, the same strategic patience I'd taught him. "Dylan, how long before the court acts on that petition?" He checked the filing date. "Under emergency statute, 72 hours. Maybe less if they claim immediate risk." I glanced at my watch. "Then we have 48. Dylan looked at me carefully. "Bruce, you know this goes beyond family drama. This is criminal. Fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, securities violations." "I know exactly what it is," I interrupted. "And we'll handle it like any hostile takeover." He raised an eyebrow. "Meaning, Meaning we don't confront, we document. We build a wall of evidence so airtight it suffocates him before he can file another motion. Dylan nodded slowly. I can trace the money. Helix's accounts aren't as clean as they think. Most of their transfers go through Cayman subsidiaries. If Ethan moved company funds there, it's traceable. Do it quietly, I said. No calls, no emails. Use paper. He smiled faintly. Old school. I like it. When he left, I sat alone with the blinds drawn, staring at the city skyline through the narrow slats. Phoenix looked exactly the same towers, gleaming desert light, bouncing off glass. But everything beneath it had shifted. My son had found a way to weaponize the system I'd built to protect our family. On my desk lay the insurance policy and the guardianship petition, 2 sheets of paper that could erase a lifetime. In real estate, I'd learned that the most dangerous cracks are the ones you can't see, the hairline fractures that spread kinetically until the entire structure gives way. Ethan had become that crack. I turned the petition over, scanning the signature line again. His handwriting was steady, confident. He'd filed it himself. No hesitation, no shame. That was when I realized the worst part. He wasn't doing this out of hatred. He was doing it out of entitlement. Somewhere along the way, Ethan had convinced himself this was justice, that he was fixing what I'd controlled for too long. He'd built a legal machine around our lives and labeled it compassion. I opened my phone and scrolled through old photos. Ethan at 10, holding a baseball glove too big for his hand. Marion beside him, sawing legs, still strong hair blown bow by the summer wind. I'd built everything for that boy. Every brick, every deal, every sleepless night. And now he was using my own blueprints to dismantle me. I picked up the phone, dialed Dylan again. Find me someone who's beaten a guardianship case, I said. Someone who knows how to fight it before it starts. Dylan hesitated. That's a short list, Bruce. Then find me the best one. Because if Ethan wanted a war built on paperwork, I'd give him one. But I'd build it stronger. Her name was Angela Meyer, and she didn't smile when she shook my hand. Most lawyers try to soften the room with small talk. Angela didn't bother. She was 58, sharp gray eyes, behind rectangular glasses and a tone that made judges flinch. Her first words were, "You're Bruce Lawrence. Your son's trying to bury you alive on paper." "Then I assume you know what I need," I said. She nodded. "Evidence, not emotion. Courts don't care who's right. They care who can prove it." I liked her instantly. Angela specialized in elder exploitation cases, the kind where children forge signatures, manipulate trust documents, and hide behind guardianship law. Her office walls were lined with court transcripts instead of degrees. She'd seen every version of betrayal family could offer. "I've reviewed the petition Dylan sent me," she said. "Ethan's approach is textbook. He's using financial guardianship statutes to establish control, paired with a narrative of mental decline. If you fight him too early, you'll look defensive. If you wait too long, the court will hand him your estate out of precaution. We need him to overplay his hand." She leaned forward. "Which means you'll have to play weak." I stared at her. "You're asking me to pretend to be incompetent. I'm asking you to let your enemy build his own trap," she said. "You want justice. Let him write the confession with his own pen." That night, we created Project Haven. It wasn't revenge. It was reconstruction, brick by brick, strategy by strategy, using the same precision Ethan had learned from me. Angela would handle the legal side, Dylan the financials, and I'd become the unreliable father Ethan believed I was. Step 1. The facade. I began canceling morning meetings, forgetting phone calls, leaving my car headlights on in the company lot. Word spread quickly that Bruce Lawrence was losing his edge. Dylan leaked just enough of those rumors to Ethan's network at Helix Capital. Within 48 hours, Ethan called me. "Dad, you okay?" Chloe said. "The board's worried about you." I let silence linger before answering. "Maybe I'm just tired, son. Been running this company too long." He softened instantly. Pity the sweetest sent to a predator. "You've earned rest, Dad. Maybe let me handle things for a while." Step 2, the bait. Dylan built a false paper trail for a hidden account under a dormant LLC called Sierra Haven Holdings. It showed a $5 million balance in liquid reserves tied to my personal authorization. Every trace of it was fabricated down to wire confirmations, interest statements, and account summaries printed on official bank letterhead. We planted those documents carefully, an open folder on my desk during Ethan's next visit, a careless mention to Chloe that the Haven funds should cover the property tax this quarter. We didn't push, just enough to make it real. By day 3, Helix's analysts were already sniffing. Dylan intercepted an inquiry email from one of their offshore branches referencing undisclosed Lawrence assets. The hook was set. Step 3, the performance. Angela coached Marion and me like we were actors in a courtroom play. Marion hated the idea, but she understood the necessity. "You want me to pretend I'm fading?" she asked. I nodded. "Only until he shows his hand." She smiled, weak but fierce. "He's my son too, Bruce. I'll look him in the eye and make him believe I'm dying if that's what it takes." The next Sunday, Ethan visited. He brought flowers, the good kind, expensive, gilt-colored. Marion sat in her chair by the window, hair unbrushed, eyes distant. When she struggled to recall a word, I saw the satisfaction flicker behind Ethan's concern. "Mom, you've got to take better care of yourself," he said softly. "It's not safe for you to be alone anymore." She whispered, "I know, sweetheart. Maybe you're right." It broke something in me to hear it, but I let it happen. That night, I recorded everything. Hidden microphones, pinhole cameras. Angela's tech team installed them behind vents and light fixtures. The entire east wing of the house became a surveillance grid. Every whisper, every conversation, every plan Ethan voiced would now be documented. Angela called it controlled evidence collection. I called it endurance. For 3 weeks, we played our parts. Ethan began stopping by the house unannounced, sometimes checking in, sometimes bringing Chloe to show how attentive they were. I let him see me spill coffee on documents, forget passwords, ask Dylan to reprint things I'd missed. He lapped it up. Meanwhile, Dylan quietly tracked his movements through the company's internal network. Late-night logins from Ethan's laptop, transfers of confidential files, access to restricted trust documents. He was getting bold, sloppy even. Every night I'd sit by Marion's bed and whisper, "Hold on. Every lie he tells is a brick in his own wall." Angela's updates came in coded text messages. Haven progressing. Patience equals power. Still, there were moments when the act almost broke me. One morning, Ethan brought a notary to the house, said it was for estate updates. Watching him set that pen on the table, watching him look at his mother's frail hands, I wanted to end it right there. To stand up and roar that I knew everything, that I wasn't weak, that he'd pay for what he'd done. But Angela's words echoed in my mind. Courts don't care who's right. They care who can prove it. So I signed my name shakily on a fake document. Dylan had prepped meaningless paperwork that would lead Ethan further into the illusion. He smiled, thanked me, and left. When the door closed, Marion looked at me with tears in her eyes. "He doesn't even look guilty," she whispered. "No," I said, "because he doesn't think he's a villain. He thinks he's saving us." That night, I reviewed the footage with Angela. Every interaction recorded, every forged reassurance, cataloged, every smirk immortalized on digital tape. "Let him file the final motion," Angela said. "Once he puts his name on the guardianship transfer, We'll bury him in his own paperwork. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's confidence grew, while mine visibly declined, at least on the surface. The transformation was convincing enough that even the housekeeper started whispering. I moved slower, answered calls with hesitation, feigned commotion over simple things. Marion played her role too, speaking less, sleeping, more letting the world believe she was slipping. But beneath the surface, our plan solidified like concrete. Every lie Ethan told added another layer of proof. One evening, while I sat on the porch pretending to doze, I overheard him talking to Chloe inside. Once the guardianship clears, funds can move legally. Dad won't even know. The words cut through me, but they were perfect. Recorded, time-stamped, admissible. Project Haven was working. I thought about what Angela said the first day we met. Let him write his confession with his own pen. He was doing exactly that. And when the ink dried, I'd be waiting not as the broken old man he imagined, but as the architect who knew exactly where to strike when a structure had gone rotten. A week later, Ethan arrived with a man in a navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase and the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed his role. He introduced him as Dr. Lowell, a specialist in geriatric cognitive evaluations. I knew the type, not a doctor of compassion, but a bureaucrat of convenience. Dad, this is just a routine check, Ethan said, his tone syrupy and usual. Standard procedure before the court finalizes the guardianship paperwork. Nothing to worry about. Guardianship. The word tasted like ash. I pretended confusion, squinting at the clipboard the so-called doctor held. I already had a physical last month. This isn't medical, Ethan replied. It's psychological. Just a few questions to make sure you're managing okay. Behind him, Chloe smiled tightly, the way people do when they are sure the win is already in motion. Angela had predicted this exact scene down to the hour. The night before, she'd sent a single text. He'll bring an evaluator. Be ready. So we were. Angela arrived earlier that morning, disguised as a technician from the home security company, her dark hair tucked under a baseball cap, badge clipped to her belt. Beside her was Janet Ortiz, an investigator from the Federal Financial Crimes Division. Janet looked younger than she was, mid-40s, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She played the role of Angela's assistant, carrying a toolkit and a fake invoice for camera calibration. Marion, still frail, but fierce beneath the act, had been brief too. She sat quietly by the window, wrapped in a shawl, hands trembling just enough to be believable. Dr. Lowell began his evaluation in the living room, asking me to name the date, the president, my address. I answered slowly, feigning the hesitation of a man losing his grasp on the present. He nodded with clinical detachment, scribbling notes that would later be used to declare me unfit. Out on the patio, Ethan and Chloe poured themselves iced tea, chatting as if they already owned the place. Hidden microphones under the table caught every word. When Lowell asked me to spell world backward, I stumbled on purpose. D-L-R-O. He looked at Ethan through the doorway and gave a subtle nod, the signal that everything was going according to plan. Angela crouched by the hallway. Router whispered into her comm mic. We've got the signal. Recorders live. Janet stood by the kitchen counter, pretending to test the power outlet. Her tiny body cam streamed the entire conversation. Ethan leaned closer to Chloe, voice lowered, but not enough. He's slipping, he said, smiling. Give it a week, and everything will be ours. The words came through the earpiece in real time. Janet mouthed silently to Angela. Got it. Outside, I could see their reflection through the sliding glass door, Ethan's grin, Chloe's hand brushing his arm. The sound of their laughter crawled through my chest like static. Lowell clicked his pen and turned back to me. Mr. Lawrence, I believe I have what I need. I straightened in my chair, My voice suddenly clear, dry. So do I. He blinked. Excuse me. I stood buttoning my shirt cuffs, the weakness melting from my posture like a discarded disguise. I said, so do I. You've just given me everything I need. Ethan turned, confusion creasing his face. Dad, what are you? Enough, I said. My voice filled the room, decades of boardroom authority returning in one breath. This farce is over. Angela stepped out from the hallway, pulling off her cap. Dr. Lowell, she said coolly. Angela Meyer, attorney, for Bruce and Marion Lawrence. You're trespassing and participating in fraudulent evaluation practices under Helix Capital's directive. This interview is being recorded. Lowell's mouth fell open. I don't know what you're talking about. Janet moved forward, flipping open a black leather wallet that gleamed under the light. Special Agent Janet Ortiz, Federal Financial Crimes Division. Mr. Lawrence's household has been under investigation for suspected elder exploitation and interstate fraud. You've just confirmed participation on federal record. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air conditioning hum seemed to stop. Ethan's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the patio tiles. You set me up, he said, voice barely a whisper. No, son, I said quietly, stepping closer. You set yourself up. I just built the walls around your lies. Chloe backed away, eyes darting toward the gate, but Janet's partner, waiting outside in an unmarked car, was already stepping into the yard. Angela nodded toward me, giving the signal. It was my turn. I reached into the folder on the counter and spread out the evidence-printed emails from Ethan's Helix contacts, the forged insurance policy, the guardianship petition, the bank statements, linking Helix Holdings to Chloe's account. Janet laid her phone beside them, replaying the audio, Ethan's voice, unmistakable, echoing through the speakers. He's slipping. Give it a week, and everything will be ours. Ethan went pale. He looked at me like a man watching a building crumble in slow motion. You recorded me. I recorded everything I said. The moment you cut your mother's water, you turned my house into a crime scene. I just made sure the cameras were rolling. Janet read him his rights with the calm rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Chloe began to cry, but it sounded rehearsed tears of someone mourning exposure, not guilt. As they stood there, cornered by their own arrogance, Marion wheeled herself into the doorway. Her voice was thin, but steady. Ethan, she said, you told me locking me away was for my safety. Was this what you meant? He couldn't look at her. When the agents led him toward the door, he turned to me, desperation flickering behind the shock. Dad, please, this isn't what it looks like. It looks exactly like what it is, I said. A son who forgot the difference between inheritance and love. Janet's partner opened the front door, guiding them into the Arizona sunlight. The same sunlight that had once poured over the foundation of every home I built. Bright, merciless, honest. For a long time I just stood there, staring at the space they'd left behind. The silence felt cleaner now, almost sacred. Angela exhaled finally, letting herself smile. Project Haven is complete, she said. I nodded slowly. No, I murmured. It's just beginning. Because winning the battle was one thing, but rebuilding what my son had broken, the trust, the love, the name, that would be the real war. Justice came faster than I'd ever seen it move in my years of boardrooms and litigation. By sunrise the next morning, every major network in Arizona carried the same headline: Stonebridge CEO arrested for elder fraud and abuse. Ethan's face, my son's face, flashed across the screens of gas stations, diners, and airport terminals. The photo they chose wasn't flattering, him in handcuffs, eyes wide, caught between arrogance and disbelief. Chloe followed behind, hair disheveled, mascara streaked, her wedding ring still glinting in the desert sun. They looked less like villains and more like children caught stealing something they couldn't even name. The story spread like wildfire. Business journalists dissected the scandal. Lawyers speculated about the charges, and social media turned it into a morality play. The billionaire's son who locked up his paralyzed mother. I'd built a company on public trust. Now that trust was gone in 48 hours. Stonebridge shares plunged 30% by noon 40, by closing bell. Partners withdrew from contracts. Our biggest lender froze the expansion project in Tempe. By week's end, the empire I'd built brick by brick was bleeding from every seam. Angela called me twice that day. "We'll stabilize it," she said. "Once the federal case is formalized, public sympathy will swing back to you and Marion. You'll come out stronger." But she didn't understand. There's no strength in victory that costs your blood. I watched the televised footage of the arrest again that evening. Ethan kept looking back toward the house as officers escorted him to the car, as if expecting me to step in to fix it, to pull the strings that had saved him a dozen times before. I didn't move. For decades I'd built safety nets beneath everyone I loved. That night, I let him fall. When the press requested a statement, Angela advised silence. But silence has a way of turning into guilt in the court of public opinion, and guilt was the one thing I couldn't let define Marion's name. So I agreed to a single interview, local television Channel 7 Phoenix. The reporter, a young woman with practiced empathy, asked Mr. Lawrence, "Do you have anything you want to say to the people who feel betrayed by this scandal, by your family?" I looked straight into the camera. My reflection stared back from the lens, older, harder, but clear. "Money can be rebuilt," I said quietly. "Morality can't." That was all. No excuses, no tears. Just the truth stripped bare. The clip went viral overnight. Some called it stoic, others cold. I didn't care. For once, words weren't a negotiation, they were confession. That night I came home to a house that felt both heavier and quieter than ever. The string lights in the garden, the same ones that had glowed during Ethan's parties, were gone. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the slow rhythm of the clock filled the silence. Marion was asleep in her room, bathed in the soft blue glow of the night lamp. Her face looked peaceful, younger somehow, freed from the fear that had haunted her for weeks. I sat beside her and watched the steady rise and fall of her chest. This was what we had fought for, not vengeance, not wealth, but peace. The kind that costs more than any fortune can reap. Still, I couldn't sleep. Justice had arrived, but trust had not. I wandered the halls of the house, each picture frame a memory turned relic. Ethan as a boy holding a baseball glove. Marion on our wedding day, sunlight catching in her hair. The three of us at Stonebridge's grand opening in 2002. I used to believe those photos captured permanence. Now I knew better. They were snapshots of innocence right before the cracks appeared. At midnight, I poured myself a whiskey and stood by the window overlooking the garden. The same garden where Ethan had laughed while his mother lay thirsty behind a locked door. I thought victory would feel clean. It didn't. It felt like ash, like the end of something that once mattered too much. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound carried through the still desert night, sharp and lonely. I whispered into the glass pane, maybe to myself, maybe to the ghosts that now filled this house. We won, Marion. But it doesn't feel like winning. And in that reflection, the old man with tired eyes, standing in the ruins of his own design, I realized that justice is only half the cure. The other half is forgiveness. And that part hadn't come yet. The house became a hospital before it became a home again. After the trial, Marion's doctors insisted on restarting physical therapy. The sessions were long, slow, filled with the muted groans of pain and the metallic click of the brace. Each morning, 2 nurses came at 7 sharp, helping her stretch her legs, lift her arms, retrain muscles that had forgotten their purpose. Progress was measurable, but peace was not. At night, she still woke gasping, sometimes calling my name, sometimes whispering, "Don't lock the door." The nightmares came without warning. One minute she'd be calm. The next she'd tremble as if hearing Ethan's voice somewhere in the walls. I told her, "He can't hurt you anymore." But trauma doesn't understand logic. She'd look at me with that haunted half-smile, and I knew she wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid of being alone, of being invisible in a house too large with memories too loud. So I stayed. I canceled board meetings, sold off 2 properties, and reduced Stonebridge to half its operations. Dylan handled what was left. Angela called weekly, with updates from the prosecutors, but I barely listened. The courtroom victories had lost their meaning. There's a strange kind of silence that follows justice, the kind that doesn't comfort, doesn't heal. It just lingers, asking, "Now what?" One evening, Marian dozed off in her wheelchair while watching the news. The screen flickered with another headline: Helix Capital Executives face indictment in fraud network. It should have satisfied me. It didn't. I turned off the TV and sat at the kitchen table. For the first time in months, the mail pile looked ordinary: bills, catalogs, a medical invoice, and then one envelope without a return address. I didn't need to check the handwriting to know who it was from. I took it out to the porch before opening it. The desert wind was cool, the first breath of autumn. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. No apology, no justification. Just 8 words that carved themselves straight into me. "I never hated you, Dad. I hated how small I felt next to you. Ethan." I read it twice, then a third time. The handwriting wavered near the end, like he'd tried to stop himself from finishing. For a long time I sat in the dark staring at those words. It was never about money. It never was. All those years I thought I was teaching him how to be strong, how to fight, how to win, how to build. But somewhere along the way, I'd made him feel like he could never be enough. My success had been a mirror he couldn't look into without hating his reflection. And so he'd broken the mirror. I went to my study, opened the fireplace grate, and fed the letter to the flames. The paper curled inward, edges glowing orange before turning to gray. But the words didn't burn. They hung in the air, whispering through the crackle of fire. "Small next to you." That was the phrase that wouldn't die. I poured myself a drink, just 1 finger of bourbon, and stared into the glass. The liquid trembled with the firelight, rippling like memory. I wondered if all fathers, at some point, become the men their sons have to destroy in order to feel alive. I'd spent my life believing love meant providing, giving structure, giving order, giving answers. But love without vulnerability is just control wearing a polite face. Maybe I had built my emperor too tall. Maybe from that height, my own son couldn't see the ground. When the fire finally died, I sat there until the last ember went out. The room smelled of smoke and regret. Upstairs, Marian stirred in her sleep. I went to her room, stood in the doorway for a long time. The moonlight brushed her face, softening the lines that pain had drawn over the years. I whispered, though she couldn't hear me, "He wasn't trying to destroy us, Marian. He was trying to find himself in a shadow I made too big." She turned slightly, murmuring something in her dream. Maybe my name, maybe his. I closed the door quietly behind me. The night was silent again, but not the peaceful kind, the kind that waits like an unfinished sentence. Justice had closed one chapter. Guilt had just begun another. And those 8 words kept echoing long after the fire went cold. "I hated how small I felt next to you." 3 years passed. The desert had a way of erasing scars if you gave it time. Wind and heat, smoothing everything down to silence. But inside me, nothing had smoothed over. Ethan was serving his sentence at a rehabilitation center in Tucson. Not a prison exactly, but a state-run program for financial offenders with diagnosed compulsive disorders. He worked maintenance during the day, attended group therapy in the evenings. They called it restorative reintegration. I called it purgatory. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Dr. Patel, the lead counselor at the facility. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Mr. Lawrence, your son has requested a family session. He's ready to speak with you and Mrs. Lawrence if you're willing." Marion, sitting across from me in the kitchen, didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "If we don't go, he'll think we never wanted the truth." So we went. The facility looked like a halfway point between a school and a church. Beige walls, soft lights, the faint smell of disinfectant and coffee. In the meeting room, a circular table waited for us. No guards, no bars. Just the three of us and Art Patel. Ethan entered last. He looked older, thinner, his once perfect posture replaced by the tentative gait of someone learning humility step by step. His hands shook slightly as he sat down. For a while, nobody spoke. The clock ticked like it was trying to fill the air for us. Then Ethan looked up. His eyes were red but steady. "I used to think I did it because of money," he said. "That if I could fix the debt, I'd fix myself. But that wasn't it." He rubbed his palms together, breathing through the confession. "I did it because every time I walked into a room with you, Dad, I felt smaller. Not because of anything you said, but because you never seemed to need any me. You had this power, this control. And I thought if I could take it even for a moment, I'd finally be enough." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. The words stuck somewhere between rage and heartbreak. He turned to Marion then. "And you, I told myself I was helping you. But I wasn't. I just couldn't stand seeing you like that. So helpless. I wanted to fix you too, because I couldn't fix me." Marion's eyes filled, but her voice stayed sharp, cutting through the room like glass. "You locked me up because you couldn't stand my weakness," she said. "But you were the weakest one." The air seemed to stop moving. Ethan's chin trembled. He nodded slowly, tears spilling freely now. "You're right." Dr. Patel watched quietly, letting the silence breathe. Then she spoke. "Acknowledgement isn't forgiveness, but it's where healing starts." Ethan looked at me again. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know I finally understand what I did, not just to you, but to myself." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and slid it across the table. "It's a list of what I learned here. They said we should write one before release." I hesitated, then unfolded it. The handwriting was cleaner than the last letter. 1. Control isn't strength. 2. Shame becomes cruelty when it goes unspoken. 3. Love without honesty becomes manipulation. 4. I'm my father's son, but I don't have to be his reflection. Something inside me cracked. The same kind of crack that happens before a dam breaks. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who betrayed us, but the frightened boy who'd spent his life trying to earn love from a man who only knew how to give approval. My voice came out rough. I was so busy building something unbreakable, I forgot people aren't made of steel. Ethan nodded, crying quietly now. "I just wanted to feel like I mattered." Marion leaned forward, her frail hand resting on the table. "You did. You always did. You just didn't believe it." The room fell silent again, not cold this time, but heavy like air before rain. Dr. Patel broke it gently. "Healing isn't about returning to what was. It's about deciding what can still be." Ethan whispered, "Then I want to start over. Not as your son who failed, just as a man trying to learn." I reached across the table. My hand stopped halfway, trembling. For years I'd imagined this moment would end with anger, or justice, or apology. Instead, it ended with something smaller, something human. I set my hand on his. Then learn, I said softly. And this time don't build anything on shame. When the session ended, Dr. Patel escorted us out. Rain had started to fall rare in the desert, but gentle, steady cleansing. Marian tilted her face toward the sky's closed lips, parted in the faintest smile. In the parking lot, I looked back through the glass. Ethan was still sitting at the table staring at the empty chairs where we'd been. He looked lighter. Not forgiven, not redeemed, but lighter. And maybe that was enough for now. Because forgiveness, like recovery, isn't a verdict. It's a decision you have to make every day, even when the rain stops. 4 years later, the desert had softened again. The dust storms came and went, the seasons turning like slow forgiveness. Marian was still in physical therapy, but she'd regained enough strength to transfer herself from chair to bed, to stand for a few moments, on her own, with the help of parallel bars. Her sessions now took place at the Desert Haven Rehabilitation Center, a quiet complex on the outskirts of Tucson, surrounded by low stucco walls and flowering mesquite. The air smelled of citrus and sun-warmed stone. And that was where Ethan worked. He'd been released 2 years early, for good behavior, taking a maintenance position at the same facility that had once helped him rebuild his mind. No fanfare, no headlines. Just quiet work, fixing leaks, repainting walls, trimming hedges. The kind of tasks that made a place run without anyone noticing. He never touched money beyond what he needed. Never asked about Stonebridge. Never once mentioned inheritance. I visited Marian every Friday morning, usually bringing flowers from our garden. She loved the orange blossoms best. We'd sit near the window overlooking the courtyard where the maintenance staff worked. That's where I first saw him again. He was kneeling by a broken irrigation pipe, his shirt damp, hands caked with earth. His movements were slow, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who had learned patience the hard way. When he stood up, our eyes met through the glass. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He just nodded once respectfully, like a craftsman acknowledging the homeowner. Then he went back to work. Weeks passed. I didn't approach him. Neither did Marian. Forgiveness, I'd learned, doesn't answer to schedules. Then one morning I arrived early. The courtyard was empty except for Ethan by the flower beds. He was adjusting the old sprinkler valves, the same kind that had once been turned against us. Marian rolled closer to the window, her tone half stern, half teasing. "Make sure the water runs right this time," she called. Ethan looked up, startled for a second, then smiled, faint but real. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He tightened the final coupling, turned the handle slowly. The water sputtered once, twice, then flowed in a steady, even stream across the boats. The soil darkened, the leaves glistened, and a soft mist rose under the morning sun. For a moment, no one spoke. Marian's eyes welled, not from pain, but from the simple beauty of something working again. The same garden that had once borne witness to betrayal now shimmered with renewal, not in grand gestures, but in the small sound of water finding its way home. I stood a few feet behind her, watching through the window, my reflection overlapping with Ethan's. In the glass, father and son divided by years and choices, yet both still there, tending to what remained. I found myself whispering, not to him, not even to her, but to the morning itself. Maybe forgiveness isn't spoken. Maybe it's built one small repair at a time. Ethan turned the valve, gently testing the pressure, making sure the flow held steady. The air shimmered with sunlight. Marian smiled, resting her hand on the window frame, her voice barely a breath. "It runs just right." The camera, if life were a film, would have pulled back then. The courtyard widening, the light spilling across the tiles, the water threading through the garden like veins carrying new life into old roots. No apologies, no dramatic reunions. Just 3 people standing in the quiet aftermath of years that had finally learned to be kind again. And as the morning light flooded through the glass, I felt something inside me unclench. Not joy, not relief, but peace. The kind that doesn't erase pain, only softens its edges. Forgiveness, after all, is like irrigation. It takes time, patience, and a steady hand to keep it flowing. The sprinklers hissed softly, the earth drank deeply, and the desert at long last bloomed. So that's my story. I'm Bruce Lawrence. I built everything and still lost what mattered most. If you're watching this and you still have your parents, call them. Don't wait until silence is the only voice left in the house. No amount of success, no deal, no company will ever be worth the sound of your mother calling your name one last time. If my story meant something to you, leave me a comment below. Tell me where you are. Tell me if you've ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. Not for me, but for the next story that might stop someone before they make the same mistake my son did. Because sometimes one story can save another family.